The chapter we are going to discuss is on sourcing and production. Okay. So, the learning objectives of this chapter will be on understanding the process of sourcing and production, how it happens in our industry, understanding the supplier base and how it relates to the supply chain. We speak a bit about global sourcing processes. We understand the ethical and contractual issues that are faced by purchasing and supply chain professionals. We also sort of understand by explaining the strategic nature the product plays in the supply chain when it comes to sourcing of the product. And then finally, we get to know more about fast fashion and emerging trends around supply chain and what are its possible and probable impacts. So, moving on. When the apparel and the textile industry came up, there were many concepts and terminologies that came into picture. Now, one of the common ones is sourcing because it's very important. It is, as you all will be knowing, the definition of sourcing is where we try and find suppliers of goods and services. So the process of trying to find the suppliers is what is the process of sourcing. The production and sourcing terminologies are sometimes also interchangeably called as sourcing and production. Okay. It is also called as manufacturing and production. Okay, so your production and sourcing um, is your manufacturing and production. I spoke about the definition, but the term as such, sourcing, is synonymical when people speak about procuring or evaluating and engaging. These are further expansions of these term sourcing. Now, sourcing strategies, you would have heard about sourcing plans, you would have heard about strategic sourcing, comparative sourcing, sourcing optimization. Now, these are the latest lingos or trendy words that are being used in the industry. However, the term sourcing, when it relates to supply chain, it's relatively new because it was more or less used around in the 1980s. Now, knowing when this concept of clothing ever started to supply chain being related to sourcing is actually quite late. So, that is why it is considered relatively recent. Okay. And then we have our production, which again, you would all know the process and methods that are used to combine your inputs which are tangible, like your raw materials or your semi-finished goods, and intangible inputs, which is your ideas, which is your knowledge and information, and then convert them into goods and services, is what production speaks about. Now, this is a little figure, or basically a table that I took from the book. And I just thought of leaving it out there because it might not directly speak to supply chain, but it has a lot of information in terms of how production or how sourcing is related to each of these aspects, be it ideation, the concept where the idea comes from, and what is the process for that. If it is design and development, what is the process for that? The same for sales, marketing, the same for sourcing as such, then production, and also receiving. What is the processes, or what are the processes that are um, providing sort of a general framework for understanding the overall process? And it's also by no means the only method for sourcing a product or an apparel, but just something that is why I thought of leaving it out here for you to read on, and which will assist you in your workplace as well. Then, one of the difficult aspects of supply chain is also about developing relations or relationships with factories that can deliver goods that is required. Okay, so like we spoke about, the focus on raw materials when they change from fiber to yarn to fabrics stage, and how important it is even at that stage to have a good relationship with the suppliers. Now, there is so much of information that has been written already previously about factories in the supply chain and when it comes to developing a supplier base. So, when it comes to establishing a reliable and trustworthy supplier base, it is only considered a critical part or a critical process because it sort of smoothens and seamlessly makes the whole sourcing and production work. So, as the term supplier base, it implies that it is a foundation to the process of procuring products or services that is necessary to be successful in the industry that we are. So, knowing the supplier base or knowing the key companies that can form part of the supplier base, be it factories, be it mills, be it trims, or any kind of suppliers, it is considered integral part of the overall supply chain. And also, not that, it plays a very key role in the organization's ability to deliver goods when the buyer needs them. Um, and then at times when we are doing all this look out for supplier base, it is also not just simply looking out for a company, but it is also making sure that we relate it to corporate social responsibility. We make sure that because the supply chain is complex and it can stretch quite far, and there might be problems to surface, at a later stage under corporate social responsibility. So to avoid those issues from arising, it is actually easy to make sure that we clarify it from the beginning. So I think you all would have heard about the Rana Plaza factory that collapsed in Bangladesh, or at least faintly remember 7, 8 years ago of this happening. And that was a complete disruption of the supply chain because of this that happened at the supplier base, where like over 1,000 workers they lost their lives, and countries and not countries, sorry, and many were injured. So this incident that sort of highlighted the need for improved oversight by the companies that are producing products in any kind of facility, and also the retail outlets that they represent. So in this tragic building collapse, there has been reports of fires occurring throughout the world in apparel factories, several in Bangladesh itself. So these could be avoided, this could be mitigated if proper steps had been taken, or even if corporate social responsibility was used to the T, which means not about the well-being of people but also the infrastructure, the workplace that people work in. So, and I'm going to use this in one of our case studies as well for you all to know more. At this stage, I just thought of giving it as an example. So, any kind of supply strategy that we deal with as a business is very integral for the success of a business, because suppliers are seen as vital players in their planning process, because they attribute towards competitiveness depending on the suppliers. If a supplier is providing good quality of raw or semi finished goods, it is only going to make the product better and best. Obviously, then it relates to being competitive. Then there have been a lot of discussions where experts and business analysts have also agreed that having a good relationship or a good partnership can lead to strong benefits to all the parties that are involved in the supply chain. So, no matter what the size of your business is, establishing good partnerships can always prove to be cost effective, and they can provide added benefits such as your treatment at the factory level when it comes to scheduling production. So, having a strong partner at the factory is also making sure that you are making um, good sense for the consumers, as well as because it can provide a consistent flow of products that will meet the consumer demands as well. So, thereby, it is important that we have strong relationships to get even stronger benefits. And then we speak about fast fashion. Now, you would be thinking how sourcing, production, and supply chain, and why again with fast fashion. But Also knowing that in the industries or in the companies that you work, that this is a theme, fast fashion as such, that has appeared in many aspects, and it has sort of become a mainstay in the fashion industry or in the clothing industry or in the textile industry. So like any new business practices, the idea of fast fashion has sort of become a trend, and it has very quickly become a cornerstone for many retail apparel businesses. Now, the fast fashion as such, it's changed the way companies set up their supply chains, the way they react to consumer demands. The fashion industry also, there are trends that is being followed through fast fashion, and that has emerged and is now a leading trend in shaping supply chains around the globe. So this concept of fast fashion is also to reduce the speed to market and provide the consumer with product on a more regular basis. Now, we know there is a lot of contradiction with fast fashion and being sustainable, but at the same time, there is this internal fiddle where there are certain companies who are belonging to the fast fashion sector and sort of leaders in the globe for what they bring into the table for consumers who are trying to also resist and carry on with this fast fashion. Um, what else I just wanted to say? Okay, in US, the supply chain was usually, previously, I'm saying like historically, it was usually self-controlled by the manufacturing companies themselves because they own their own factories and they produce the product directly under their control. But with this situation of fast fashion, with the situation of strategic supply chains, it has a overwhelming response from the consumers where they want it their way and not what the companies want to provide them with. So they are increasingly relying now on the supply chain by using factories and facilities that are owned by other entities that are environment friendly, and that the supplier base is more important than ever. However, in contradiction to that, in other parts of the world, like your Inditex, which is your parent company to Zara, is an example of a company that still owns factories that produces some of its own products. Whereas what we said previously, the companies set up in US, they have their range of suppliers and or factories, and they work with them. Um, so this company, Zara, as we all know, it's a leading global retailer. It has come to personify the retail philosophy of fast fashion, and which has changed the ways that fashion companies look at supply chain. And also, Zara, as a company, takes pride in itself on changing its floor sets every few weeks. They create demand for its products by keeping inventory at levels that allow for quick sell throughs and replenishment of new goods on a rapid cycle. So what they are doing is amazing, but yeah, in the sustainability footprint, in terms of that, it is not that great to carry on the process that it is in currently. So again, going back to the importance of supplier base in the supply chain, it is also important that um, with the rise of fast fashion business models that allows free trade, that allows technological developments, that sort of revolutionizes the supply chain to meet the consumer demand, it is also something that one needs to rethink over and over again, and how it can be bought into more towards the sustainability angle as well. But even having said that, because as consumers, so consumers with non clothing textile background, for them they receive it well because they consider it ubiquitous within the industry that we are in. It's very precise shape and form. And then Zara as such also champions a vertical business model that focuses on in-house control, and not giving it out to other suppliers. So it has its own perks and it has its own um, demerits as well. Okay, then we speak about emerging trends, but we speaking emerging trends in terms of sourcing and production. Okay, so other than fast fashion being one of the emerging trends, there are other trends also that are affecting the fashion industry from a supplier based perspective. Okay, so if you remember, we studied the BCG matrix in second year. So where now these group, the BCG consultancy group, they conducted a study and they identified that there are several trends that one needs to consider when it's about developing a supply chain. So, and some of them, or the major case in this our industry, is about globalization, it is about digital movement, it is about omni-channel model, and it is also about financial factors. Now, if we speak about each of them, globalization also places huge amount of demand on the supply chain because of the need to balance your local business practices with those of the practices around the globe. And this sort of adds a bit of stress to the supply chain from a shipping standpoint as well as from a sales and marketing standpoint. Now, the digital movement that also requires transparency when it comes to pricing, when it is coming to frequent replenishment of goods that are um, sent to the consumer's doorstep, which is also adding pressure onto the bottom line. Now, with technology, it has also come to the omni-channel model where consumers demand options on how to buy and when to buy products, which then puts additional stress on the supply chain. So the idea of omni-channel is a relatively new concept to our industry. It is mainly a multi-channel approach to sales that seeks to provide the customers with a seamless shopping experience, whether it is shopping online, from a desktop or mobile device, or in brick and mortar stores. This model brings added stress for companies who needs to keep abreast of all the technological trends. They need to develop ways to get products into the consumer hands. Now, now in this case, if the consumer is picking it in a store, if it is ordering in online or pick up in the store, um, have the product been sent directly to home or using some other variations? So now there is, to do that, there is addition of QR codes. Now consumers can then multitask by exploring and researching new products and also determining the best price that they need. So this is, as you can see, is putting a pressure, and now retailers are trying to figure out how to manage these new modes of delivery. So previously, what used to happen, retailers would select two or more separate and quite distinct locations for service, which is your online and the brick and mortar. But now, with these coming up new concepts, they are already looking for new ways of how they can bring the product to the consumer's doorstep and again still try and keep the price low. So, with the new sophisticated systems and technology, companies are also figuring out how to handle these multiple channels from one location and also trying to maximize profit but still control the cost. So, there's a lot of story going behind it. Now, the financial factor of it is all that we are speaking now needs finances, but in limitation. You cannot splurge, you cannot overspend because you have to keep the end product low. So, this is what trends are coming up, and this is how companies are fighting across in the supply chain, all the parties in the supply chain, to make sure that they stay abreast to the trends. Now, there's this project by the name Project Just. It's sort of a little story about a co-founder by the name Natalie Grillon, who started this Project Just, and the goal was to bring transparency to the supply chain within the apparel industry. So this project started like about 7 years ago, and she sort of brings a very unique perspective to the company because she herself doesn't have a clothing, textile, or fashion background, but she has worked in many management specialized groups in West Africa, and she has herself done a MBA in sustainable global enterprise immersion from a US university. So she has that kind of background, and from where she is asking all of us to take a look at the clothes that we are wearing today, where they are made, under what conditions they are made, or if that they are using natural fibers, where is it grown or who has harvested it, and were those workers treated fairly. Even asking these questions also sort of provides a platform for the idea of disruptive innovation. Disruptive innovation is the idea of that case study of Bangladesh, the Rana Plaza factory collapsing because we're saying we're innovating, but at the same time it is not um, done peacefully. It is involving a lot of disruption around it. So this company, or through this project, just she has actually conceived and developed to answer some of the questions, and she has tried to provide consumers with as much information as possible to make a informed decision as to what to buy and how to buy. So it's about connecting. So this project is all about connecting designers and consumers to ethical suppliers. Okay. And so that we as consumers get greater transparency when we look around things. Um, so I'll give you a small example. If we look for organic cotton, okay, looking for it is a big challenge now, as today, as of date, the total world production of organic cotton can only fit on one large container ship, which is approximately equal to 1% of the world's cotton production. So you can imagine, when we're looking at buying, in summer or any time of the year, when we look for products that are authentic and organic cotton, what is it that we're looking at? And do we, in the segment of society, even are deserving enough? Because for that 1% of organic cotton, it would be worth billions. And to come down to each product price, it would be few $1,000s for a piece of that organic cotton made apparel. So we don't even are getting it. So what is it that companies are actually saying is better cotton, or it is sustainable cotton, or even some of them claim it's organic cotton? So the questions that Natalie is asking through this project is something to deeply think of, because is that even true when they're saying it? Okay. um, then we go back to some other emerging trends. um, the two major that identifies or comes up is your labor and compliance. How and why they are emerging trends? Because they sort of go hand in hand, and the more the compliance the industry gets, the higher the wages will be needed to cover the health and safety costs that are also directly connected to compliance. And because these are highly essential to be a corporate socially responsible supplier or factory or company, it is something that company needs to focus on. And not just that, because people are aware now. Natalie, not being even from a clothing textile background, has come up with such ideas. So obviously a lay consumer buying any kind of clothing item is equally conscious and careful, and they want those kind of information, which can only be achieved if companies are practicing that and get the legal approval or the certified approval of being called as CSR policy approved companies, or companies that have good compliance being followed in their companies. Then another is your technology. I spoke about that earlier also, but technology is something which sort of speeds up or accelerates the spread of information about compliance, about worker rights, and the industry tragedies that occur every now and then. So this spread that happens, it continues to increase pressure to develop policies also. So that is in a way good, because it is making sure that people are aware, the normal audience or normal mass of consumers are aware, and it indirectly pushes back to enforce such kind of policies. Then transparency. Again, I spoke about transparency also, because consumers demand transparency throughout the supply chain. So companies need to reveal all their sources of supply, from fiber to trims to packaging. So, of course, the industries will never be in a position to reveal all its information because of fear of giving away some of its competitive advantage as well. So, that is again a flip side of it. Um, but yeah, at least mostly being transparent and providing a thorough accounting of supply chain to the consumer. The issue of providing too much information also at times can become a non-issue. So yeah. Another aspect that continues also to be speeding the market is the degree to which consumers want the products immediately. So this entire fast fashion movement, coupled with a generation of individuals who seek immediate gratification, that also creates pressure to the supply chain to deliver goods as quickly as possible. Another trend that we see is your near shoring. So, which is basically what it is, the effect of reducing lead times by sourcing locally certain aspects of the product. Supporting local, so it allows for sourcing to take place closer to the point of manufacture, which will also enable the company to reduce their lead times. So, source locally or source nearby is near shoring. Reshoring is basically bringing production back from a foreign country to the home country, which is reshoring, which we as South Africa as a country must do, where also policies and government must enforce of reopening or reshoring of the manufacturing unit, and it might work well for certain products and aspects of the industry. But till date, this idea of reshoring is done in a very small portion of the business, and in also most cases in the niche market. So, for example, it won't be exactly reshoring, but related to it, where we see in manufacturing, we don't have full on mass manufacturing, but we do have manufacturing involving products and accessories that are truly South African. The fabrics, the beads, that is South Africa known for globally, is something that is being done voraciously, but it is now considered as a niche market, but not as a market where manufacturing happens for the mass, because some of it, some of us actually are able to buy it either due to the price, either due to the availability, or also at times it might be due to the cultural barrier as well. Okay, then moving on to strategic line planning. So, in our industry, strategic line planning is considered necessary in developing the end product, whether it is your women's wear, whether it's menswear, children's wear, or a variety of subcategories that make up for all of these. It always comes back to the product, and that is where strategic line planning comes into picture. So, in any successful supply chain that has been effectively able to meet the needs of the consumers, they all have a common denominator, and that is your SLP or strategic line planning. Now, leading fashion or clothing companies also use this each season because that helps them to build on a vision and a strategy for the brand, for their product lines, for their targeted consumers, for their planned volumes, and also for a relative economic performance. Your in terms of your price and margin, those kind of things. Now, the question, when we're speaking about strategic line planning, we're speaking about products. So, for product to happen, the question arises of where in the world the product should be sourced, and that is often determined by the product itself. As certain countries or as certain regions of the country, they possess an expertise in a particular category. For example, Peru is known for Pima cotton. China is known for silk. So, speaking a bit about silk, it's actually a mainstay for Chinese silk industry. You will see the one common thing if you ever Google and look on Chinese woman is that scarf they put around, and it is made of real silk. Now, again, the question of Like in case of cotton, what is the real silk there also is questionable, but they are known for um, their industry for major source of silk that is used in the global clothing industry or fashion industry, because here they have um, abundance availability of silk yarn. And because silk yarn is often considered as a luxury fiber or fabric, and it also depends on how the fiber is produced, it goes through many processes, and therefore the costs tends to go higher to produce these natural fibers, because the processing of this to spin it out into a yarn, then to make a fabric out of it, is quite complex and a lengthy process. So they also like cultivate cocoons and caterpillars, and they need to be raised to create cocoons, and then they are transformed into yarn. So as such, it is a very long process. So if one asks where do we look for silk, then the first thing will come up is in China. So it sort of determines in itself. And then the country that is chosen to establish a supply chain is also predetermined on many factors. This means that your reminder of your supply chain must be balanced around that country and region. So if you know that this is China is the place where I'm looking for silk, and you as a company are in the business of selling silk items, then you have to make sure that all your supply chain is in and around that country or region, or close by to that country. So if there is no restrictions in terms of trades practices and all of that, then there is more freedom of choice in terms of where sourcing will take place and any other additional factors that needs to be considered. But other than that, there are also certain factors, and you remember I always mention about the external environmental factors. So these are the ones here. Social and political climate. Which countries are open to trade? Are there any political restrictions, etc.? Or how are they going to affect the decision of carrying out a business deal or transaction? Then infrastructure, if the country has good roads and vehicles to be sent off products to the nearest port, your electrical and water supplies. Some companies might also rely on generators for backup in times of power failures. Then your proclivity to natural disasters, countries that are prone to floods and earthquakes. um, Bangladesh as a country, sorry, has a rainy season throughout most part of the year, which makes it difficult when it comes to moving products to the port. So, what time of the year needs these kind of business or transport needs to happen is also a big question mark that companies keep in mind. Then price. It might not be a determining factor, but it also depends on the product directly. Okay, because we see the lowest price that we can get. Then we have economic instability that can be around currency, it can be around the economic capital of a country and how stable is that. Then we have cultural differences. Now, that includes your language, your religion, holidays, which days are what. We have the Chinese New Year where everything is shut down for those 2 weeks and no business transaction happens. I think it also happens in Vietnam and some other countries, as an example. So, all the business deals are to be sealed by then. Because if you are trying to reach out to any Chinese person or individual for businesses in that time frame, you will never get them, because when they are off, they are literally off of everything. So there is no travel, no transport, no business deals that are going to happen. So it is beneficial to always be culturally aware and also be sensitive and knowledge of cultural nuances that can come along this work that we are in. So it is always best to double check. Then our trade agreements, we spoke about how they determine the flow of goods, or how they have a direct impact on the cost of goods, um, and how they can play a major role in where production is placed. And then at the end, CSR, we've been speaking about that the whole week, about the policies and ethical behavior, and countries that offer and accept bribe for certain considerations. And in certain countries, it is culturally acceptable as well. It might not be part of their policy, but it is acceptable. And then, on knowing all of these, how or having identified the country and having to agree upon a factory and make our considerations, how one's own organization is set up. So, the company that is going to make all these transactions and deals with other countries that are rich in their resources, how the organization itself is going to set itself up. So, for example, will the organization provide their own trim or packaging, or will the organization buy a complete package of everything? Or if the organization has fulfilled the portion of the work and they are working directly around it. So, there are all of these aspects, and these things vary from company to company. Some companies will say, okay, we will do our own CMT and then negotiate the price, which will be different than getting a full package of everything being done and only the final product is being delivered. So, regardless of all these methods, the price will need to be negotiated for the services that is being rendered. And the most common method is FOB, or free on board. We're going to speak about it in our next slide. So, the term FOB, these are basically our shipping choices, and the most common one is FOB, which is free on board, and it is considered the most common means of shipping freight as they are often the most cost effective. Why? Because this is commonly used when it comes to procuring goods from a factory. They can either be any one of the kind of FOB. It is either FOB to origin or FOB to destination. Now, FOB to origin means that the seller is paying for transportation of the goods to the port, your port as in to the shipping port, as well as the loading of the goods. Okay. And then after that, the buyer takes the ownership from the shipping yard to the point of retail sales. But if it is FOB destination, it means that the seller is assuming the freight cost to the final destination. So FOB origin is always the most common method in apparel and textile industries. I guess that's because then the buyer can distribute it to different provinces or states in the country or cities in the country as and when the number requires them to. So that's why FOB origin is the most common one over destination. Then there is another term that we come across, which is CIF, or cost insurance freight. What happens is, if the buyer says that we are buying a full package, okay, we spoke about just now in the previous slide, either you get a full package or you say I will only need some work or some um, requirements in terms of raw materials, the CMT part I'm going to do it. So in case where the buyer is saying, okay, I am going to say that I need a full package from overseas, then it is generally understood that they mean that they are purchasing the product FOB origin, like we spoke now. But if the seller is clearing the goods for export and delivers them on board, bearing the cost of freight and insurance to the port of entry that is named by the buyer, then the term cost insurance freight comes into picture. So, which means in addition to that, you are also bearing your insurance, you are bearing the cost of the freight that is being needed. Previously, it was just on board. After that, everything else the buyer will deal with. But here, with cost insurance freight, they are covering the insurance in case if there is anything that is going to be in form of a hazard or a mishap, and also at the same time the freight cost. So if you see, in essence, the buyer is still buying the full package with the seller picking up the additional cost of freight and insurance. So this method generally is not very common because it sort of increases the cost of goods sold to the buyer. So therefore, it increases the amount of duty as well that will be charged when there is custom clearance. So currently, even majority of the companies go by FOB origin. Okay. Then we have land duty paid. Now, land duty paid is another method to bring goods into United States or to any country for that matter. And it means that the seller is assuming the cost of the goods plus the freight and the tariff. So now that's again duty that is being added on top of it. So the buyer will receive the good at the port, having paid the seller for not only the cost of goods, but they're also going to pay for the cost of freight and tariff. So what happens is, in this scenario, you will see that the risk is assumed by the seller until the buyer takes possession at the point of entry. So there are different kinds of agreements that happen. This is one of them. So whatever happens until the buyer signs off and receives it is falls under the seller. Um, it is many times negotiated as well. It might not be a preferred method for our industry, but it might at many times be negotiated. It can be in electronics, it can be in vehicle manufacturers. So depending on the cost that the product involves, and many a times if it is bigger companies that are selling these kind of goods, then obviously they will have their own discounts and benefits added of a certain amount. If you transporting, your tariff will be such and such. So it also becomes a bit of easy to the buyer because now the seller is big and a globally renowned seller. That's why it's not that common in our industry. Okay, so having gone through all of that, in conclusion, um, it's important to have a strong supplier base. It is to ensure that a seamless and transparent sourcing and production is carried out. Choosing the right supplier and understanding the process of how to work with and utilize that supplier is also critical, because it will make sure that we have a productive and a profitable supply chain with a best product or a best end product. Also, making sure that we adopt new trends in sourcing, like we spoke about nearshoring and reshoring, if they are considered when developing a supply chain, then it is going to benefit the overall sourcing philosophy. Also, like we do line planning, if we decide on where and how the production is placed, it sort of simplifies the complex process of sourcing and production. So it is always also best to ensure that we create the best product for the consumer, because then ultimately we get the most benefit and profit out of it. Okay, so that's about it. Thank you.